Salut! In today's lesson, we are going to extend on what we have already learned about comparatives in lesson 10. After that, using comparatives, you'll be able to compare lesson 10 to this one and tell me which one is better or less annoying, for example. We will then extend to superlatives, which is a way to say that something is the best or the most comprehensible, for example. Maybe this lesson will be it? You can tell me in the comments once we're done. And at the end of this video, I'll give you a little quiz, just 3 questions, so tell me in the comments also how you scored. And also remember to download the class notes because there are 3 more short points that I won't cover in this video about ordinal numbers, the word room, and how to say that a room has a certain type of view. But let's get to our lesson. As we have seen in lesson 10, using an adjective, we can compare 2 things by saying one thing is more, less, or as, using an adjective, and then the second thing. For example, this lesson is as entertaining as lesson 10, or a movie is more interesting than a book. In English, when you use a short adjective, the comparative will be included with the ending er. For example, this lesson is easier than lesson 10. Easier here means more easy. In French, we always say more, less, or as, and the adjective, except for good and bad. So you need to remember that in French, we will say more easy rather than easier. This means our sentence, this lesson is easier than lesson 10, will be in French, cette leçon est plus facile que la leçon 10. But we've seen this already, so I invite you to go back to lesson 10 if you have trouble with this first one. Okay, one more thing you can compare is quantity or amounts. This one is the easiest to learn today. It's as simple as learning plus de for more, moins de for less, and autant de for as much. Let me explain. We have learned that things that use quantity or measurements use du for masculine, de la for feminine, and des for plural. For example, du lait for milk, de la farine for flour, and des frites for fries. Well, when you compare these things, you only use the preposition de, because we're talking about a quantity of something. It was the same when we saw how to say none of something. In that instance, we used pas de. For example, flour is de la farine, but no flour is pas de farine. Rice is du riz, but no rice is pas de riz. Well, here it's the same. If you say I have more rice than flour, you will say j'ai plus de riz que de farine. See, we will always use the preposition de here. One quick note is that when pronouncing the word plus, P-L-U-S, we usually do not pronounce the ending S, except in this instance. Here we do say plus de with the S pronounced. So learn that for comparing quantities, we use plus de, moins de, and autant de. Here are 3 examples. Je mange plus de frites que toi, meaning I eat more fries than you. Elle mange moins de riz que toi, meaning she eats less rice than you. And nous avons autant d'argent que Marie et Jean, for we have as much money as Mary and John. Alright, today we're also expanding and learning about how to compare the way things or people behave with adverbs. Adverbs modify a verb, where an adjective modifies a thing or a person. For example, you can use the adjective fast in the sentence, Philip is fast, because it describes Philip. But you can also use the adverb fast in the sentence, Philip runs fast. Here, because it describes the pace at which Philip runs, it modifies our verb to run. Fast is a bit of a hard example because it's the same word for both. But to help you, I can tell you that if you can replace fast by quickly, it's an adverb. After all, you can say Philip runs quickly, but you can't say Philip is quickly. There you go. Now you know the difference between the adjective and the adverb fast. Well, this brings up that in English a lot of adverbs end in ly. In French a lot of adverbs end in ement, but definitely not all of them, so don't just learn that. For example, calmly is calmement, slowly is doucement, fast or quickly is rapidement, but it can also be vite. So when comparing the pace of two people, for example, using the verb to run, courir, you will use the comparative word plus for more, moins for less, and aussi for as. Remember that just like with our adjectives, in English you end up merging the words with the adverb. This is why more fast becomes faster. In French, we do use both words. So for example, Philip runs faster than Peter will be in French, Philippe court plus vite que Pierre. You have to imagine it as more fast. But you can also compare the way two things behave as long as you use adverbs. For example, a croissant cooks faster than a cake will be in French, un croissant cuit plus rapidement qu'un gâteau. Now there's one exception for comparing how things behave with adverbs, and it is the adverb well, which in French is bien. Just like in English, where you cannot say more well and you say better, in French we cannot say plus bien, and we say mieux. This means that the sentence I understand this lesson better than lesson 10 will be Je comprends mieux cette leçon que la leçon 10. But do remember that with less and as, we still keep the form moins or aussi and then the adverb bien. For example, I sing less well than John will be Je chante moins bien que Jean. Alright, we have one more thing to cover and then I'll give you a quick quiz with 3 examples about comparatives and superlatives. Our last point is about superlatives. This is when one thing is the most or the least with an adjective. For example, the most beautiful book or the least entertaining person. Just like in English, you will need to use the. The is a definite article. Definite articles in French agree in gender and number with the noun it defines. This is why we will say le or la or les plus for the most and le or la or les moins for the least. The adjective will also agree in gender and number with our noun, just like when we compare two things with an adjective in lesson 10. So, knowing this, we can easily translate this is the most interesting lesson. Lesson in French is leçon and it is feminine. Therefore, we will use la plus intéressante. And we can say c'est la leçon la plus intéressante. Here is another example with the masculine this time. I am reading the most interesting book will be Je lis le livre le plus intéressant. Okay, there are 2 more points I need to make. First, if you want to say that something is the most or the least in the something, for example, the most interesting thing in the world, in French we will use the preposition de for of and the definite article le, la or les. This means that we will have du for masculine, because de le does not exist, de la for feminine, and des for plural, because we cannot say de les. Therefore, if we go back to our previous example, I am reading the most interesting book, we can add in the world at the end of this sentence, and we will say in French, Je lis le livre le plus intéressant du monde. But we can also say Je lis le livre le plus intéressant de la terre, if we wanted to use the feminine noun terre for earth. The second point is that in English, just like with comparatives, short adjectives get lumped up with the superlative most or least. This is why the most funny is, in English, the funniest, etc. Well, in French, there are only two exceptions. Ready, so always use the superlative normally, except with the best and the worst. The best is le meilleur, or la meilleure, or les meilleurs. Even though you may hear someone say le plus bon or la plus bonne, technically it's wrong, so this one poses no real issue. The worst, however, is literally the worst in French. Why? Well, because sometimes you can say le plus mauvais or la plus mauvaise, or les plus mauvais or les plus mauvaises, but also le pire, la pire, les pires. I've tried to come up with an actual rule that matches the way people actually use them in French, and I could not. Technically, things that have a taste will usually be okay with mauvais. But let me tell you something. They all work with pire. So maybe try to use pire all the time. That's my advice. Just know that if you can use both le plus mauvais and le pire, usually le pire will sound a little harsher. For example, je mange le plus mauvais croissant du monde means I eat the worst croissant in the world. And it will sound bad, but je mange le pire croissant du monde will sound a little bit harsher. Personally, I don't know about you, but I'd prefer to eat le meilleur croissant du monde. What do you think? Can you tell me in the comments where you think we can find that? Anyway, let's finish with a little quiz. I will give you a sentence with a comparative or a superlative in English, and I will show you 3 possible answers, out of which only one is correct. I'll give you 3 seconds to pick one, and then I'll reveal the correct answer. Alright, let's go. Number 1. Sebastian has more fries on his plate than Catherine. Here are 3 possible answers. Sébastien a meilleures frites dans son assiette que Catherine. Sébastien a plus de frites dans son assiette que Catherine. Sébastien a plus de frites dans son assiette que Catherine. I'll give you 3 seconds. 2, 3. Alright, which one did you pick? The correct answer was Sébastien a plus de frites dans son assiette que Catherine. Here we are comparing quantities of fries, so we use plus de for more. Alright, next one, number 2. Sebastian is nicer than Catherine. Here are 3 possible answers. Sébastien est plus gentil que Catherine. Sébastien est gentiment que Catherine. Sébastien est aussi gentil que Catherine. I'll give you 3 seconds again. 2, 3. Alright, which one did you pick? The correct answer was Sébastien est plus gentil que Catherine. Here in English, nicer replaces more nice, but in French we still use plus for more and the adjective gentil, which is masculine because it describes Sebastian. Alright, last one, number 3. Catherine is the worst character in the movie Cruel Intentions. Here are 3 possible answers. Catherine est la meilleure dans le film Sex Intention. Catherine est la pire personnage dans le film Sex Intention. Catherine est le pire personnage dans le film Sex Intention. I'll give you 3 seconds. 2, 3. Alright, which one did you pick? The correct answer was Catherine est le pire personnage dans le film Sex Intention. Here there are 2 things. First, we used le pire and not la pire because it agrees with the word personnage, which is masculine. I know it's confusing, but you have to look at the noun, not the actual character when using the word personnage. Second, I can't just skip and not rant a little bit about how ridiculous the translation of movie titles are in French. Somehow, Cruel Intentions, which was an American adaptation of Les Liaisons Dangereuses, released in 1999, ended up being titled in French Sex Intention. Why didn't they just title it Les Liaisons Dangereuses? Probably because to a French person, it sounds like a boring movie from the 18th century, and this was supposed to be hip and cool in the 90s. Well then, why didn't they just translate the English to intention cruelle? I have no idea either, although I will argue that France has a tradition of translating American titles with Anglicism that is easily understood by a lambda French person. This is why the movie title sounds English, but uses a French word. Another example is The Hangover. A lot of French people wouldn't understand what The Hangover means, but they didn't want a French title, so they used a common English expression that any French person would understand, and they called it, in French, very bad trip. Anyway, I'm ranting at this point, and this has nothing to do with our lesson, but I felt it needed to be mentioned. In the meantime, I hope you learned something, and don't forget to tell me how you scored in the comments, or how ridiculous the French movie title is. I'll see you on the next one. Au revoir.